and things. So in Orchestrator, it determines how our bots are run. So let's look at Orchestrator really quick here. If I can, there we go. So when you are playing with UiPath, make sure you just come to UiPath.com and sign in. It'll let you sign in with like your Google account or whatever else. And I don't think it switched to that tab. And then we can set up how we want to run it, where we want to run it. We can monitor it and do whatever we want. But there are a lot of different things you can do inside of this web interface. So again, highly suggest you check it out. But for the most part, and especially for the context of the exam, we'll just be looking at this for Orchestrator. So it shows you the data table that we're working with. It shows you the workbook we're working with. And it shows you the name of the activity that we're at. That's what you're looking at here with our debug tools. And that's just the output. So we also have our call stack. This will tell us what part of our process we're in as we move through it. So in our case, we have this exception that's been thrown right at the beginning of our process. So the call stack is pretty short. But as we dive deeper through our process and we start to add more things and we get more values and we get more complex and we get more programs we're interacting with, this call stack is invaluable when it's time to debug issues. And then if we did have any breakpoints, those would show up in here and just tell us the activity name that we're working with. But that is the basic overview of the debug tools. So if a bug, it will come back up to the high-level sequence and let us know that there's an error. So don't be alarmed whenever you do see errors happen in your processes. This is normal. It's a part of the development cycle. There's just going to be errors. That's why we have to make sure we can debug things pretty efficiently. So this tells us there's just a runtime error. It tells us which activity the error happens in. It tells us what the error is. If we needed more details, there we go. We can open the logs and check it out. There are a lot of options to really get to the root cause of any errors that pop up while you're going through this development. So that is the basic of how we debug things use when we're debugging. So when we're looking at our regular breakpoints, this comes up when we just put a breakpoint on a specific activity. It will stop the whole sequence or the whole workflow at that particular breakpoint. Then we have conditional breakpoints. So when we have a conditional breakpoint, these breakpoints are only hit when a certain set of conditions are met. So if you have, like, let's say you're onboarding some new employee, but they're not starting for another month or so, you might not need to do anything with their Slack account, their email account, or things like that. But once a certain date passes, you decide that, okay, it's time to really onboard them and finish the rest of it. And you just want to test out that workflow locally, you could make a conditional breakpoint that does that for you. And then we have our trace points. So A trace point is really similar to a breakpoint. It's just going to be a particular place where you are able to go through the code or go through the particular sequence that you have and see everything leading up to that point. So what happens with your trace points is that you're able to basically go back in time and then come forward and see how those different values change your workflow. And conditional trace points are kind of similar to the conditional breakpoints. You can decide where you want to trace back to based on whatever set of conditions that you need. So we kind of took a look at breakpoints, but I want to make sure we get to some of the more advanced things in Studio. So let me see if I can put the screen back here. So if you didn't catch that, all I did was right-click on this particular sequence, and it doesn't have to be a sequence. You can right-click on almost anything and make it a breakpoint. So I'll put it on this body sequence, and we'll go ahead and run it. But I think it's going to throw that error again. But let's just step into this. And then if we step back out, and then if we step over, you can see how we can throw an error. But if I come back in here and just stop for a second, there are a couple of things that I want to point out that are for more advanced debugging. So you have this window that's called watch, and we can add an expression in here to watch for. So if there's a particular value that you want to see if it changes as we step through our debug process, you can look at that and flag it in this watch tab. And then we also have the immediate window. So if we had any string variables or numbers or lists or things like that, we would be able to come in here and interact with them directly in this immediate window to see what happens as we change those values. So these are a couple of the more advanced debugging tools that you might take advantage of because, again, they give you more granular insight into what's happening in your particular activity or your workflow. So now that we've seen that, we're going to look at testing.